Hi, Dr. Furi. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Good morning, Deon. I can hear you quite well. Thank you so
I
much for
do,
coming on this morning.
I do apologize. It's just because there are two classes running simultaneously. I
Oh,
kind of had to go via the website and not through my Teams because I was
okay.
listening in. I was here 15 minutes early, and I was just
Thank you.
listening in as you were going through the assignment.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to leave it over to you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Okay,
Furi. Keep well.
thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to perhaps give everybody just a moment, toilet break, perhaps, and we will be starting at 9:06. 9:06.
Dion, I don't seem to be able to mute participants who've got their mics on, and I don't want to mute you at the same time. That wouldn't
Not a
be great.
problem.
So student B. Perret, can you just mute your microphone, please? Student Perret, can you mute yourself, please? I'm just worried if I mute everybody, I'll mute the presenter as well. Thank you so much.
Is it all good, Dr. Furi?
We're all good. Thanks, Dion. As soon as you're ready in a minute, you can go.
No problem. If all participants could just perhaps put a thumbs up if you guys are ready to go. It is 9:06. Okay. So welcome everybody. Welcome back to semester 2, where we will be starting with Unit 6, the assessment of the writing process. But before we start with our unit, I just want to remind you of the objective of this particular unit, which can also be found on your Moodle. We will be working through the content, and by the end of this lesson, you will be able to demonstrate those objectives. And I just want to check in with you, and I want to check in with you by starting with an icebreaker. I want you guys to navigate towards your chat box and go to your emojis. And I want you to just show the emoji that basically responds to the following question. And the question is, what emotions are associated with written expression tasks that you have observed among your learners? So just go to the chat box for a minute and just choose an emotion that best describes the emotions you've observed that are associated with written expression tasks among your learners. Not necessarily the learner that you are working with, but the learners in your classroom. I'm assuming that most of us are teachers. And if you are in those spaces, use what you have observed. If perhaps you're not a teacher and you are working with a learner for this particular module, show the emotion that applies. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Andre. Taylor. Okay. Yep. Yeah. A whole range of emotions, isn't it? A whole range of emotions that are involved. Because the truth of the matter is that learning is an emotional process, right? And so emotions sometimes tend to hijack our abilities to perform in a way that we can. And so we need to be cognizant of it. Thank you for sharing those emojis. Quite interesting. Yep. The different emojis shows the different emotions that are associated with the expressions of learning tasks that you have observed. Yep. And so we keep those emotions in mind because, again, I remind you that emotions are involved when it comes to learning. And we need to be able to observe that because that allows us to pave a way forward in terms of putting blocks of support for our learners. Thank you so much, Zihle. Sometimes I feel like that too, especially if I feel unprepared. But those are emotions that are involved when we are given certain tasks. And I'm sure that the emotions that we've shared, that we can relate to those emotions because as scholars yourself, you are going through the ups and downs of the emotions that are part and parcel of the academic journey. And so it is normal for emotions to be present in the learning spaces or the spaces of support. And so those are things that we need to be cognizant of. And so just going forward, thank you everybody for sharing. Those who haven't shared as yet, please do continue to share the emojis. I will come back to it later on as we conclude. Now, just going back into that which was already shared with you in the previous units. Let me just switch off my camera so that I do not cause distortion or so that I do not distract you from focusing on the content which will be displayed. Give me a minute. So just before we continue, I want to just activate your prior knowledge in terms of what you already know and what we have covered in the previous units. And so we know that competent writing requires many relatable abilities, including a proficiency in spoken language, as well as the ability to read. And that was beautifully emphasized by Dr. Fourie, as well as the skills in spelling, which we have covered, and legible handwriting and knowledge of the rules of written usage and cognitive strategies for organization and planning when it comes to writing. So keeping our prior knowledge in mind and the importance it plays in the written expression task, we need to therefore remember that individuals with learning disabilities often lack many of these critical writing related abilities. And they also tend to have severe problems communicating through written tasks. Their writing, if you view it, is filled with errors, like the example that is in front of us, filled with errors in spelling, punctuation, capitalization, handwriting, and other areas as well. Now, their written products tend to be short as well as poorly organized and impoverished in terms of ideation. And so we need to keep in mind that their inability to communicate effectively and to share ideas through written communication can actually persist over time and can go into the adult years if they are not supported or if no interventions are provided. So we therefore understand holistically that by its very nature, that writing is an active process, right? The physical aspect of writing forces active involvement upon the writers. The writers perform the action of like picking up a pen or a pencil and recording their thoughts on paper. So much reading occurs during the process of writing. As soon as the writer completes a section of writing, they usually reread it. And that is how written tasks are taught in the classroom. So the process of reading thus becomes a process of construction, a form of writing. In both reading and in writing, people set and revise goals, refining and reconstructing meaning as they go through the material. But if they face problems in one or more of the areas, it hijacks their ability to showcase their true potential. So we need to understand that written expression develops over time. And the written form of language is the most sophisticated and the most complex type of communication. In the hierarchy of development of language skills, it is typically the last of the skills to be taught in the classroom, although the whole language curriculum encourages children to write before they learn to read. And so writing develops from pictures and scribbling and letters. I remember growing up and there was a whole wall dedicated in the passage that I could just scribble on. And that piece of wall in the passage brought about great joy because it allowed me to explore and become free with my thoughts. And so I couldn't resist after seeing this picture to put that picture on there, because I don't know how many of you have perhaps have had the same experience, but writing develops over time. And when children start scribbling or drawing lines and things that don't make sense, it is just the process of writing starting to find root. And so by giving the freedom for them to do so through writing, they can integrate previous learning and experiences that they've integrated through listening and speaking and reading. And that informs correct spelling, right? And language structure and letter formation so that writers communicate. Communication can be understood by others, since communication is achieved through language, verbal and nonverbal language. If spelling is not correct, then miscommunication can happen. And I've just included that example of how easy it is to miscommunicate through the writing process. I found this quote by Westwood, which I really think is relevant. And I just want to share it with you. It says that written language requires the writer to formulate ideas, organize the sequence points in logical order, select vocabulary, check for grammatical correctness, spell words correctly, punctuate, and write legibly. And so one must be able to keep one idea in mind while formulating it in words and sentences, and be skilled in planning the correct graphic form for each letter and word while manipulating the writing instrument. And so the writer must also possess sufficient visual and motor memory to integrate complex eye-hand relationship. So writing is required in all subjects of the curriculum, as we know, not only those in which written language is the center of instruction. And so the following features are prominent in the written language, and that is interpretation, that the interpretation is possible after it has been put into written words, that nonverbal language is not involved when the message is interpreted, and that the language system must be familiar to the reader. That therefore brings us to the following slide, which just shows that when practicing formal handwriting, that learners may write untidily, line formation and letters are uneven, and that incorrect letter formations are present, that additional of unnecessary lines and curls are also part of the expression. Poor word and letter spacing is visible, poor line quality, incorrect placement of letters, poor perception of motor skills, and uncertain hand domination. And we will be elaborating on this as we go forward, as well as the emotional difficulties like anxiety and lack of desire to try. Hence, I asked you as an icebreaker, what are the emotions that you have observed that are associated with written expression tasks among the learners that you are currently teaching? And so this brings us to the stages of the writing process that is involved. Now, experts have they've agreed that writing is a learned skill that can be taught in a school setting, and that it should be taught as a thinking, learning activity. Therefore, instruction should emphasize the writing process. The process of writing is therefore cognitive, and it requires both backward and forward thinking. And good writers do not simply sit down and produce a text. Rather, they go through the stages of writing process. And so if you have done your dissertation, if you've done a honors, or you've perhaps done an essay type of writing, you will understand the stages of the writing process. And if you are teaching languages, or perhaps you are teaching all subjects in a primary school, you know that there are stages put in place to teach learners to become competent writers. And the stages that experts have identified are the pre-writing stage. And during this first stage, the writer gathers ideas and refines them before formal writing begins. Now, this is an activity that involves a type of brainstorming that is involved, and we normally encourage students to start with mind maps, or where they can just brain dump all of their ideas. They can also just jot down all of what comes to mind and just develop an outline or a list of the main points to be made in the essay. Now, during this time, the writer also identifies an intended audience, because we normally give them topics on which to write on, and the topics alludes towards the audience for which they need to write for. And so they need to keep that in mind as well. Can you see how complicated the writing process is? And thereafter, it is the drafting of what you have done. And in this second stage of the writing process, the writer records the ideas on paper. Although many people think of this stage as just writing, it actually is only one step in the process. The term drafting could be used instead of writing, just to emphasize that this is one version of what eventually will be written, and it will be changed in the process. The first draft of a piece of writing is not for the reader, but it is for the writer. And at this stage, there may be an overflow of ideas with little organization or consideration of prose, grammar, and perhaps spelling. Thereafter, the same work needs revision. Now, having completed the pre-writing and the drafting stages, the writer then refines the drafted version of the text. The writer takes the ideas of the first draft as well as what he or she have organized on the pre-writing, and they polish it up, which includes checking for grammar, punctuation, and spelling errors as well. Normally, this is done in the classroom through peer revision. And so that allows learners, that is another process that allows learners to perhaps be helped by their peers to identify those things that could have been, that are perhaps blind spots when it comes to them engaging with their own work. And so it just allows them to identify those errors and to correct them. And at this stage, this stage requires a very critical view of one's own work. And at this stage of my life, I have realized that writing is not an isolating process. It's not a process done in isolation. The best writers write in collaboration with other people. And so now I understand much better. Therefore, I'm emphasizing that because as a teacher, an English teacher, teaching these processes, I had the tendency of just rushing over it, not really understanding the importance of really sowing that seed so that that could be the way a student process content when they step into the real world. And so now that I know better, I choose to do better going forward. And then this leads us to the sharing with an audience. Now, this fourth stage is important because it gives value and it gives worth to the entire writing process. And it provides with the opportunity to receive feedback and to perceive themselves as authors or responding to an audience. And that is very important. As a teacher, I know that because when I was overwhelmed by the amount of students that I was required to teach and the workload that comes with it, the feedback didn't happen the way that it should have happened. But in the absence of that feedback in itself just widens the gap. And so now that I know about it, I'm more conscious about the importance of feedback, so that learners can understand or can understand who they are in terms of their ability to express themselves through written work, and for them to discover their strengths or their challenges and find ways to overcome those challenges. And so in this final stage, I believe that the writer considers the audience for whom the material is intended and whether the ideas will be well communicated to the intended reader. And I just think perhaps there's an opportunity here for teachers to close the gap. How can we close the gap in terms of allowing this to really take root in our classrooms? That is perhaps by allowing space after learners have engaged with essay writing, by allowing space for them to actually make use of that work by standing in front of the class and using it as an oral assessment if need be, if time doesn't allow, so that what they have written privately is showcased publicly, therefore just really feeding into their self-concept. I really believe that we need to bring education to life. We need to make it practical, and we need to make it real as part of the supporting strategies that will assist learners to overcome the difficulties that they might have. So that brings me to the conversation about assessment of written expression. Now, handwriting is very necessary, given all of the content and the theory that we've just worked through. It's very necessary to be competent, even in these days of the magic computer or the word processing AI, right? Now, in schools, it is the usual medium through which learners convey to teachers what they have learned. In many life situations, adults find handwriting an avoidable necessity. However, handwriting is the most concrete of the communication skills. Therefore, handwriting can be directly observed, evaluated, as well as preserved, providing a permanent record of the output. And teachers can informally construct assessments. There are also formal assessments that have been designed for individuals or comprehensive academic achievement, to just view that. What we need to keep in mind is that to produce the graphic presentation during the act of writing entails a lot of processes, therefore, or a lot of skills for that matter. Therefore, observation is key. Now, in your assignment 3, you have been given a number of assessments which you will be using, and one of the assessments is based on just observing the written expression. And so it is important that you take that which we have spoken of in Unit 1 in regards to observation, and which have been the golden thread throughout our engagement, that you bring it into the space of assessment when assessing for written expression. And that is because the act of writing entails a lot of skills, like visual and motor skills that depend on the motor function of the eye and the coordination of eye movement as well. And writing also requires smooth motor coordination of eye and hand, control of arm, hand, finger muscle. Writing also requires accurate visual and kinetic memory of written letters and words. And so it is important that as you observe and make use of the assessment that has been given to you, that you include your observation and you triangulate it with the data which the assessment will produce. We need to keep in mind that extremely poor handwriting, also sometimes referred to as dysgraphia, may reflect other underlying deficits as well. So learners with handwriting problems may be unable to execute efficiently the motor movements required to write or to copy written letters or forms. They may be unable to transfer the input of visual information to the output of fine movement, or they may be poor in other visual motor functions and in activities requiring motor and spatial judgment. And so we keep those things in mind. Therefore, it is important to just analyze learners' work that they have done. And this involves reviewing the students' classwork and homework apart from the assessment that you will be doing. Gathering that data. It is useful to analyze work samples from perhaps different subject areas and compare the students' work sample from earlier in the school year with the current samples in order just to note the progress or the regression. And then in terms of the diagnostic inventory, there is the sentence completion series, and this is just a comprehensive inventory that assesses the students' written language skills in specific areas, which is not included, but it's just, this is the diagnostic inventory, since we're speaking about formal and informal. What we need to keep in mind, therefore, is that when really dealing with dyslexia or dysgraphia for this matter, that we keep in mind just the difficulty that comes with having the handwriting, a handwriting problem. So we keep in mind, therefore, that it is a complex issue. As I mentioned, that a lot of people struggle, a lot of learners who are struggling with dysgraphia, they will avoid engaging in such activities. So keep also note of the emotions that you are observing when doing the assessment. So for handwriting support, when teaching handwriting to a learner who experience handwriting difficulties, the following aspects should be attended to: the ability to handle the writing apparatus, skillful hand-eye coordination, knowledge of the information of the letters, the direction in which the letters and words follow each other should be correct, words should be spaced correctly, and then positive motivation and encouragement should be provided as you observe the learner during the assessment. Learners may apply for concessions when you do see that there are problems, when you do see that the data requires you to make recommendation. But apart from the recommendation, it is important that you keep in mind perhaps strategies for teaching written expression as part of the support and the intervention. And one can make use of what is called the multisensory learning approach, where you make use of the auditory perception and the memory of letter sounds, and visual perception and memory of letters, as well as just the other multisensory methods in spelling. And there's a lot out there that can be done in terms of making use of senses to help learners navigate the written expression difficulties. When it comes to handwriting, keep in mind that handwriting involves complex perceptual motor hand and eye coordination, as I said. Teachers should attend or support most effective use of apparatus, as well as kinetic exercises to reinforce the writing as well as the spelling, as well as the direction of the words, which I've already mentioned, and the formation of the A and the O in terms of cursive as well as manuscripts, manuscript writing. Now, research has shown that manuscript writing has certain advantages, and it is easier to learn since it consists of only circles and straight lines. And the letter forms of manuscript writing are closer to the printed form use of reading. And then cursive writing also has certain advantages. It minimizes spatial judgment problems for the learner. And many students with learning disabilities find it difficult to make the transfer to cursive writing after they have learned manuscript writing. And those are things that we just also need to be aware of as we engage with the written expression of our learners. Very important is the context, of course. And this is something that I've been including throughout our units, and that is just being cognizant of the second language aspect and the problems that it might pose in terms of how learners give expression. And so what is quite present in second language English learners is the following, and that is spelling, the reversals and the vowels, the vowel combination and consonant combinations. And that also is the punctuation difficulties. That is the capital letters, the full stops, the commas, and then grammatical errors. That is also quite present. That is incorrect prepositions or incorrect use of interrogative pronouns. What I really want us to also be cognizant of, given that we work within a multicultural context, is to allow left or right dominance. Rather, therefore, we should rather change the paper position and not try and change the dominance of the hand, because in certain cultures there's a belief that if you are left-handed, that there's a meaning that it translates into, and vice versa. And so we should just allow learners to use their strengths and change the environment basically in which the learner finds themselves. I want just to make you aware that the department does offer learners concessions who are struggling with written expressions. And so if the data shows that learners are struggling and you have started putting interventions, or you've made referral for interventions, and you see that no progress have been made, then the best option would also be to apply for concessions. And there's a process, and the process have been engaged with you. However, it is important to take note that these are the criteria. The writing speed is significantly slow, handwriting is illegible, learners are unable to write due to injury or physical disability, specific learning disorder where there is a confirmed diagnosis as per DSM-5, impairment in written expression, a diagnosis of dysgraphia, and where the use of computer is not an option, learners with significant visual impairment not yet proficient with Braille or any other devices for the visual impaired, and then learners who make use of the scribe also qualify for additional time and separate venue. And here's just a sample of illegible handwriting which will qualify for a scribe. This is just one of them. We can assume that this could be a high school learner just because of the density of the writing and how much the learner tried to write versus this handwriting, which will also qualify for a scribe. Now, if you think of all of the content that we have been speaking about and seeing these two examples, one can therefore conclude, or one can therefore understand why observation plays such an important role or part when it comes to the assessment of written expression, and why it is best done for teachers perhaps through the curriculum based approach. And that brings me to the end of my slides. Are there any questions? Let me just go into the chat box. Can we get the slides stuck? Yes, I will load the slides onto Moodle, given that we can't really load the videos anymore. I will be loading the slides as they are onto Moodle so that you guys can have access to it. Courtney did notify me that you guys had a session in this week, or if I heard her correctly, or will be having a session. And she normally would relate whatever queries to me. But you guys also know that you are more than welcome to drop me an email, ask for consultation if there are any difficulties going forward. I see that there's no questions in the chat box. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, there's one question from Brits. It says, I have a question regarding all our previous lecturers. Can we get all the slides from previous lectures as well? There's so much valuable information on them. Yes, I don't think that lecturers will have a problem sharing the slides that you guys have been engaging with on this platform. I will, if Dr. Fourie is not here, I will relate the message to her in regards to y'all's request. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this session. Let us just check out by choosing some of the emojis. How are you currently feeling? Being in the center of your journey, your learning journey. You are journeying with learners, but you are a scholar too. So how are you feeling? Let us share those feelings by going through the chat box, and just check out by sharing our emotion of how we are currently feeling at this leg of the academic experience. Oh, Tammy. Taylor. I'm not going to try and pronounce all of your names because I might butcher it, but I can see all of the emojis that is currently being shared. Yep, those are emotions are part of us. Yep, we need to acknowledge them so that we can process them, do business with them, and so that they do not hijack our ability to show up and do what needs to be done. If you can't do that for yourself, how are we going to show up for our learners to support them overcoming those barriers? And so let us apply those exercises, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a question that you wanted to ask, Nelly? Your mic is on. Was there a question?
Thank you, sis.
Okay, thank you, Nelly. Okay, everybody can just catch a 5-minute break. Perhaps catch a 5-minute break so that you can, those who need to return for the next session, so that you can be back by 10 o'clock for the next session. How do I stop sharing? Thank you.